Okay,
Recording
there we
in
go.
progress.
Like this is like for the new generation, the first sentence in English that people around the world learn. Recording in progress.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so I actually put a lot of time into thinking about this class today.
Yeah.
I have here about 350 pages. No, just kidding. But I have a whole bunch of notes.
Mhm.
And the reason I use the notes is because I realized that you have people who might be doing translation.
Yeah.
So therefore, I'm going to try really hard not to be a New Yorker.
I will translate for you today.
Yeah, I don't. If I spoke New York, I don't think you'd have a clue what I was saying. So therefore, there'd be no point in translating anyhow, right? So I'm going to try to just speak really a little bit slower. And I thought by having notes, it would be like ankle weights. So kind of like hold it down a little bit, and just kind of make it a little bit easier. So that's why I'm going to be using these so that I can like simultaneously look at all these beautiful people, or at least their invisible videos. I mean, the screenshots, and then at the same time actually be able to go through the classes and all the rest of it. So
Okay, cool.
all right. So whenever you're ready, you tell me, we'll get started. I'm really happy that my chevra from Inigua is here. Thank you very much, Carmela and crew, for joining us. What happened to number 99? Gosh, the red tie and the sunglasses. Are you really in Nigeria, or are you in Miami Beach? What's going on here? Okay, all right.
This is Nigeria.
I know it's Nigeria, but it looks like it's Miami the way you're all dressed up. All right. So, yeah, Dot, should we start?
Yes, we can start.
Okay, great. So, the name of the, by the way, I'm also going to leave, since you're the host, Dot, you can be responsible for muting if there's a lot of background noise or things like that, okay? Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So, the name of the class is called Why Are Atheists Afraid of God? And I want to just say something before getting into the material in the class, because this is really important. This class is not about making fun or light of anyone who has the opinion or calls themselves an atheist. Some of my best friends are atheists. And the whole idea of this is, even though we live in a world, unfortunately today, where if somebody does not agree with you, then we don't respect their opinion. And even worse, we try to silence their opinion, that their opinion should not be heard, which is a horrible thing. It's very, very anti-Jewish in many of its basic concepts. In Jewish law, in Jewish understanding, we see that the law, there was a great argument between two dynasties. One was called Hillel and one was called Shammai. And in the end, the law was resolved to follow like Hillel. And one of the reasons that the law followed Hillel, one of, not the only, was because he was very humble. And every time there was a dispute between him and Shammai, he would always allow Shammai to speak first. Then when Shammai was done, Hillel would repeat everything Shammai said in order to ask Shammai, did I understand what you said correctly? And only after Shammai said, yes, you understood exactly what I meant to say, only then did Hillel go and express what his opinion was. Now, just imagine today, in the United States, I'm just saying the United States as an example, everywhere in the world, especially, here in Israel as well. In the United States, you have an argument between the Republican and the Democrat. Could you imagine one of them saying to the other one, no, please talk. And when he finished, he repeated everything he said and made sure he understood. And then he added his own opinion. That would be a wonderful world we would live in if we showed respect to people who are different than us. It's very easy to show respect to people who are like us. It's very easy to be friends with people who share our same political or philosophical or religious or business outlook. But to be a friend with somebody, sincere friend with somebody who's very different than you, that's how you can see what kind of a quality person you are, because you are really an open person and you're not afraid to hear them because you know what you believe. Therefore, you can respect and try to understand and listen what it is that they have to say. To do that basically boils down to, like in software, where the flow chart comes into the decision and you have a 0 or a 1, it basically boils down to, how are you programmed? Are you programmed to be a person who loves truth? Or are you programmed to be a person who always must be right, even when they're wrong? For a person who really loves truth, it's an amazing thing. Like we spoke about this a little bit in our last class with the Nigerian group, but if you will forgive me, I'll repeat just quickly the idea. There are many examples in the Talmud. The Talmud is endless with argument, but one of the classic duelers in the Talmud are known as Rava and Abaye, who were both very close and yet completely opposite ends most of the time. And they're going back and forth in a very, almost like fencing with a knife, going back and forth, each one bringing a different proof. And then all of a sudden, one of them has his sword to the neck of the other one, meaning allegorically speaking, he won the fight. What did he do? He turned around and came over to his friend and stood next to him. And he said, listen, if I were you, I would answer me ABC. I would answer you by saying the following. In other words, he came over to his friend in order to tell his friend how to beat him. Imagine you're in a chess game and you're just about to do checkmate. And all of a sudden, you go to the guy or woman on the other side of the table and say, oh, you don't have to lose this game. If you do this and you do this, you'll get out of my checkmate. So most people would think you're crazy because your purpose is to win the game. No, if that's your purpose, okay, but you could be higher. Your purpose is the love of truth. And if there is still a way for the game to go further because it didn't really reach the best it could be, then even if it meant undoing your move, that's okay. You don't care. You love truth. So when a person learns to love truth, they are no longer embarrassed to be wrong. They are no longer afraid to admit they made a mistake. Only somebody who always has to be right is somebody who can never admit they made a mistake, or they will grudgingly, or even worse, they'll be angry at you for pointing out that they were a mistake. Like the famous children's story of the king with no clothes. He's walking around with no clothing and everybody is lying to the king because they want the king to like them. So they say, oh, what beautiful clothing. It's a little boy comes and says, what are you talking about? The king's naked. There's no clothing here. So when a person really loves truth, they want to hear what it is, even if it's not so pleasant. It's like a person learns, the Baal Shem Tov said that while a compliment really makes me feel good, it doesn't do anything for me. It's like sugar. I get really high for a few minutes and then the sugar goes away. But if somebody comes over with a criticism of me, and I love truth, I love criticism. Why? I'll give you an example in my own life. I used to play maybe 3,000 years ago. I was a very serious basketball player. I went to one of the best colleges in the United States to play basketball called Syracuse University. I grew up playing basketball. In my crib, I think I had a basketball next to me. I always played basketball day and night. I walked through my school bouncing a basketball. Everything was basketball. And every time my coach came over to me and he said to me, listen, if you keep your elbow in and you let your hand follow through, you're going to make many more points. I could have got upset. I could have simply said, you know, whatever, I'm good enough. But I wanted to become a better basketball player. So whenever he came over and told me what I was doing wrong, I ate it. I ate it up because I could become a better basketball player. That's basketball. What about life? What about why we're really here and what we're doing with our life? So therefore, this idea of respecting others and learning from their wisdom means never to make fun of other people. So certainly, I'm not here to make fun of atheists. God forbid, that's a pun. I'm not here to make fun of atheists. But there is a pun, there is an irony in the title. Because an atheist means somebody who believes there is no God. If there's no God, then how could an atheist be afraid of God? There's no God. That's what we're going to look at in the class today. Just one more interesting thing about not believing in God. You would think, especially among religious people, you know, guys who wear these things and so on, that the whole thing is about God. It's all about God. So therefore, you would think that being an atheist is the worst thing a person could possibly be. What could be worse? You blew it. You missed the whole point of why you're alive. But that's not how we look at it as Jews, as Yotairen. We don't look at it like that at all. We look at it rather that God gives all of us free will. This is the gift of our lives. We are put in a little box called Earth. We live only a certain amount of time. Nobody lives forever. And while we are inside this little world, we get to have a toy called free will. Free will means you have the right to not believe in God. The Rambam, Maimonides, in Jewish law, writes a fascinating point about this. He says that in Jewish prayer, we have what's called a quorum, a minyan, a gathering of 10 Jewish men over the age of 13 years old in order to pray. If one of those men does not believe in God, he is still counted as one of the 10. Amazing. Now, question would be, if he doesn't believe in God, why is he there? Maybe because he's a really nice person. And although he doesn't believe in God, he respects his friends that do believe in God, and he understands that he's necessary as the 10th man in order to create a minyan. So he does it as an act of kindness because he's a very kind person. So therefore, you see a very interesting thing, that a person being an atheist is not by any imagination the worst thing a human being could be, God forbid. There's worse, or I shouldn't even say that. There is worse, but that's not one of them. And that's what we'll take a look at. And the way we're going to do this is, instead of putting down atheists, which is not my job for sure, we're going to put up questions. We're going to ask questions that maybe we've never really thought about before, because sometimes a lot of us come to conclusions in our lives. We have a certain growth period in our lives when we're babies, and then we're children, and our minds are very open, and we really are learning and learning and learning. And then somehow, somewhere, the door, the window gets closed. Maybe it's because we think that's how we are called a grown-up, because now we know everything. Now we have opinions. Now I think this about this, and I think that about that. And I stop thinking. I stop questioning. I just go into cruise control. I'm not really growing. I'm just getting older. You know, they say there's two ways to go through time. One is to age, and the other is to sage, to become a wise sage rather than just an old person. And that only happens by a person who is willing to question the things that they have already taken for granted. So many people, unfortunately, which is what point we're going to talk about with questioning, they feel that a person who has a fear of God, it sounds like ye old religion. It sounds outdated. People look down their nose at people who say they have a fear of God. They look at them as either somebody on the lowest level of connecting to God or just stupid. But very rarely will you hear in today's world somebody says, I have a fear of God, and people like applaud, people compliment, people praise such a person. That you don't hear anywhere whatsoever. But here's the interesting thing. Everybody fears something. There is no human being, it doesn't matter if you're in China, Nigeria, New York, or Jerusalem, there is no human being that does not fear something. Now, fear breaks down into two categories. One is fantasy fear, and one is real fear. Fantasy fear is when you're a little kid and you're afraid of the monsters in the closet or under your bed, right? This is what it was like when I grew up in New York. Once my mom put me into bed and the light went out and the door closed, all the monsters started to come out. And unless it was an issue of life or death, there's no way that you would put your foot out of the blanket back on the floor, because the minute your foot was exposed, the monster under the bed would take hold of it and you were dead, right? But then you grow up and you realize there is no boogeyman. There is no monster in the closet. You realize this. That was a fantasy fear. Now, fantasy fears also grow up. Many, many human beings, unfortunately, suffer horrible depression of fear of things that don't really exist. Most people actually suffer fear of the future. They have a fear based on what they know now. They assume what will happen. And so therefore, they have terrible fear of what's going to happen. I'll just share with you in my own life. As many of you know, I just went through a major cancer surgery. And before I went into the hospital, obviously I was afraid. Obviously I feared what was going to happen in the hospital. But I had to say to myself, I don't know what's going to happen. I only think I know what's going to happen. So therefore, there's two possibilities. I could be afraid today about tomorrow, in which case I lose today. I'm already afraid about tomorrow. I have no today. Or I could be afraid about a tomorrow that might not ever happen. Maybe, which thank God, the surgery will be a total success. In which case, instead of being afraid, I'm very, very thankful that my life was saved. So people fear the future when in fact, we have no idea what the future could be. Now, don't mistake fear with planning, with being organized. You know, the best defense is offense. If somebody threatens to kill you, you should get up early in the morning and kill them before they even wake up. There's no commandment from the Torah to be an idiot. The Torah commands you to be wise. But I'm talking about fear of fantasy, fear of something we really don't know. Because there is another type of fear, which is very real. Fear of putting a metal fork into an electric outlet, right? That's a kind of a healthy fear that keeps you alive. certain types of fear, which are based on real things, are the way that we survive. So fear is a good thing if it's really based and rooted in reality. Okay. Sometimes there's another type of fear, which is a real fear, but the fear is so far removed that it's not worth being afraid over, unless, of course, maybe you want to make a Hollywood movie out of it. For example, the chances of any one of us ever getting hit in the head by a meteorite falling from outer space is, I mean, there's a much greater chance of, God forbid, getting hit by a car. The odds of getting hit by a meteorite are almost, there's not even almost a mathematical fraction that could explain the probability of that to happen. But yet, people fear it. People feel aliens from other planets coming down here to eat us or kill us or take over our planet or whatever. People fear these things. So the question really becomes now, how does a person deal with fear? Well, there's one more element here, and that is levels of fear. For example, a person may really fear, and this is a good thing, how other people think about them. You know, there's a passage in the Talmud that says, if somebody calls you a donkey, ignore them. If two people call you a donkey, buy a saddle. In other words, sometimes we can learn a lot about who we are by listening to what other people say about us. We can learn. That might not necessarily be right what they say, but there has to be something there that we could discover about ourselves, inside of ourselves, by listening carefully to what other people say. So therefore, let's say I have a fear of what people think of me. I would like people to think of me as a good person. I would feel very afraid if people thought of me as a liar or people thought of me as a hypocrite. Okay, now hold that. Now there's another level of fear. Maybe I'm afraid of my boss in work. Maybe I'm afraid that he'll fire me. Maybe I'm afraid he won't advance me. Maybe I'm afraid of whatever. I'm afraid of my boss. Now, what happens when my boss comes over and tells me to lie? What happens when my boss comes over and tells me to break the law? Says, you know what? Actually, I have to tell you this. I don't know. I apologize. I don't want to be too American in our classes, but I remember about 10, 15 years ago when the huge American accounting firms, Anderson and all these other big firms, were getting brought before the United States Senate for just unbelievable crimes of millions and millions and millions of dollars. And in one of the US Senate hearings, the people from Anderson were there with all their books on the desk there. And the senator says to him something, and one of the accountants says, oh, that $1 billion. I'm sorry, I didn't know what you were talking about, right? So like now you have people who are telling you, you know what, you're my accountant. I want you to hide that money. Change the books. What do? You have one level, you have a fear that you don't want to lose yourself, your self-value, your self-meaning. On the other hand, there seems to be a greater fear, and that's a fear of your boss. Why would you fear your boss? What is it about us that makes us fear? I mean, it's a good fear. I mean, you don't want to lose your job. But what about on a deeper level? Fear reveals what you worship. Fear reveals what you really believe is power. Therefore, idolatry can come in the form of major corporations. Idolatry can come in the form of governments. Idolatry can even come in the form of religion. Idolatry is a power of which we fear because we have made something more powerful than me or more powerful than it is. Because really, why would I ever want to give up my self-dignity to lie? You know, it's interesting, in English, you have the word believe, and in the middle of the word believe is the word lie. And you have in English the word friend, and in the middle of the word friend is the word fiend or foe, meaning your enemy. Just a little interesting side point about the English language. But anyhow, you have a situation where now you have a conflicting level of fear. And the question then really is, what are you afraid of? What are your, let's call them idols that we fear? I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but let's break it back down to the atheist. So therefore, let's play a game. If there is God, right? Let's just challenge ourselves to open our mind for a minute. Don't have to really believe it, but let's just play the believe game for a minute. If there really is God, then actually the highest form of fear is fear of God. It's nothing to look down your nose at. It's nothing to think lowly of if there's God. Because if there's God, then everything is under this God's control, not idols, God. There's nothing that could possibly compete with this God. And therefore, if God said to you this, then to do anything else other than that, you couldn't do it because you would be afraid of God. If God says to you, don't hurt other people, if God says to you, don't lie, if God says to you, don't break the law, you can't do it because you're afraid of God. That's everything. Because where could you possibly go in the universe where God can't find you? It's not going to happen. That's if there is God. So then that becomes the highest level of fear. If there is no God, then yeah, you're right. Fear of God is no different than fear of the boogeyman, of a make-believe monster, because there's no God. What are you afraid of? There's no God. So now we have a situation. Maybe there's a God. Maybe there isn't a God. How do you deal with this kind of a question? Well, step one is to make sure you're really asking a question. In the book of the prophets, one of the most famous women prophets was called Devorah. And Devorah got very angry because during one of the Israeli wars, she, with the general Barak, summoned all of Israel to send soldiers to fight in this battle. And two of the tribes did not send soldiers because they had a question as to whether or not they had to send soldiers. And they left it at that. They left it as a question. But in the end, the question became their answer, because in the end, they didn't send the soldiers. Why? Not based on a real answer, but based on a question. So the first thing we need to ask about our questions, are we really asking a question? If somebody says, where was God in the Biafran War? Where was God in the Holocaust? Where was God in Nanjing, Nanjing? The movie, right? Which is portrayed Nanjing. What happened? Where was God? Is that a question? Is somebody really, really wanting to hear the answer to that question? Or is it an answer dressed up to look like a question, like a wolf wearing sheep clothing? That's really what we need to do. Step one is there really a question? And then if there really is a question, then how do we deal with the question? We have to analyze the ramifications of the choices. For example, our question, is there a God? Is there not a God? Let's say we don't know. We can't know. We're not supposed to know. Because if we knew, we would become robots. We would no longer have free will. So how do we know what to do when we don't know what the answer is? So we analyze the two sides. If there is no God, and I live my life as a righteous person in the service of God, okay, people will think I'm crazy. People will make fun of me. What's the worst I did? I don't know. I didn't steal any money from anybody. I never hit another person. I always made sure if something wrong was going on to step in and bring justice. If I saw somebody was hungry, I gave them food. Didn't matter to me if they were Jewish or not. If they're human, feed them. That's all it is. So that's how I lived. I lived a noble life. Not so bad. But let's go the other way. What if there is God? What if there is really God? We don't know, but we're weighing it right now, trying to figure out ramifications. What if there is God? Well, then if there is God, and there's purpose to my life and to your life and to everybody's life, and that purpose in life is to be able to open up the lights of the higher worlds and bring light into the darkness of the physical world, which does not mean to negate the physical world, to not go poo to the physical world, because the physical world is also an expression of creation, but rather to take in your hand the physical world and to be able to open it up and let the light of every beautiful thing in creation to be seen in this world. If that's what we're all about, and we do that, then not only do we live in this world, we live forever. Because if there really is God and we don't know how to make that connection, we are like somebody who is trapped in water under ice and can't get up to the air. We're trapped. It's just a moment or two till we're dead. So therefore, what happens is when a person doesn't connect to God, their heart becomes ice. They become cool, which is really cold, and they lose caring, and they lose feeling, and they lose love, and they lose warmth. All the things that when a person is really connected to life is what they're all about. So therefore, when we don't know what to do, we have to think, what is the P&L? What's the profit loss that we have to juggle between the two choices in order to be able to have a look at this? There is another level of fear, which at this point, we're going to call it the highest level of fear that all human beings feel, which is a fear of death. Person will do anything in their power not to die. I remember when I was a kid, I had a dream, one of the strangest dreams I ever had in my life. And in the dream, I guess I was watching too many James Bond movies at that time, but in the dream, I guess I was a spy or something, and I got caught by the bad guys. And the bad guys had a pistol to my back, and they were walking me out of the building. So, of course, as a kung fu master, in the dream, I spinned around to kick the gun out of the hand. Now, we're going to do this in slow motion, zoom, not to zoom around, but zoom in the camera sense, how it happened. Here was the gun, and in the dream, my foot goes like this, and it just misses the gun. So now I turn around, and the guy's got the gun. I just tried to kick the gun out of his hand, and I start talking to him. I go, whoa, hey, look, I didn't mean to kick the gun out of your hand. If I kicked it out, believe me, I would have given you back the gun. I just had to see if I could do it, right? If you were in my position, you wouldn't have tried to kick the gun out of my hand? Of course, I would understand, you could understand. And for some reason, obviously maybe because it was my dream, I was able to convince him. He was, all right, just shut up and keep walking. So then, of course, another second later, and I go spinning around to kick the gun out of his hand a second time. And again, I missed. And at that point, I woke up because I realized there was no way I was going to convince him a second time that I was only kidding. But that's what we would do. We would do anything and everything not to die. It's a fear of death, is a very human, powerful fear of death. This is why in America, we used to have an expression, there is no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. Foxhole is when you're in the army, you dig a hole, and that's where you're fighting. And when you're there, that moment with bullets flying over your head, hopefully, as opposed to into your head. So that moment, a person no longer, or rather, a person is no longer an atheist, because at that moment, now when they're facing the fear of death, they have a sense of life of God. There's a very cute joke. When I was preparing this class, I thought, okay, now at this point, I'm going to tell 2 jokes. But I have to warn you that I was once a speaker at where we met at the digital publishing conference in Beijing.
In Beijing, okay.
And I remember when I got up there were like 300 businessmen in the room, all well dressed, and they all had headphones. And I decided I was going to try to tell a joke. So I told the joke, and it was like the room was like dead silent. I thought, okay, maybe I'll wait a minute. Maybe when they hear the translation, like nothing. One guy in the far back right side bursts out laughing. And I see he's Irish. But I realized that trying to tell over an American joke in China was a horrible mistake. So I'm going to try to tell these over slowly and hopefully in a way where the point, which is the main thing, will come across. So there's a story of a guy who falls off a boat and he's drowning. And he's trying to swim really hard to get to the land, which is far away. For the first time in his life, he begins to pray. He says, God, save me. I'm not going to make it. I need you. I'm not going to get to the shore without you. Swimming, he's swimming. He says, God, please, I'm getting tired. I'm getting tired. He's swimming and swimming. God, I don't think I've got much more. Without you, I'm dead. And all of a sudden, he makes it to the shore. And he turns around and says, never mind, God. It's okay. It's okay. Thank you. I made it on my own. Thank you. Right? Something to think about. Meaning that, of course, I mean, the only reason he made it was because of God. But he, of course, thought that it was himself that made it in order to get to there. For example, the guy's on a mountain cliff, and he falls off the mountain, and he's falling to definite death. But all of a sudden, as he's falling, there's like a little branch that comes out of the cliff, and it catches him, and he's way up in the air, hanging by this little branch off the side of the cliff. And there he is. And he yells, he said, if there's God, please save me. I will become your humble servant forever. Sure enough, a loud voice comes out of heaven and says, I am God. And the little guy goes, whoa. He says, save me, God, save me. So God says, let go of the branch. And the guy thinks and says, is there anybody else out there? Right? In other words, what does it mean when the guy says, save me, God? It really means save me, but according to my rules. This is the subject we are going to get into, which I mentioned before, of the root of what we call idolatry. Idolatry is where we create God in the image of man. Torah, Bible, is about understanding that man, meaning male and female, of course, are created in the image of God. Now, there's a problem, at least for Jews, we have a problem. And that is because God has no image. So how does God create us in the image of God if God has no image? Right? Is God white? Is God black? Is God yellow? Is God red? Right? Which one of us is made in the image of God? The white guy, black guy, red guy, yellow? Right? Nonsense. God's invisible, has no image. So therefore, it doesn't make any difference what color your skin is. because you're equally made by the same God who loves all of us. Full stop. Anything else after that is idolatry. So therefore, what does it mean to be in the image of God? It means to imitate God. Just like God is kind, you be kind. Just like God is forgiving, you be forgiving. Just like God feeds the hungry, you feed the hungry. And that's how we are living in the image of God, by acting like God. This is what Abraham came to teach the world. And he did it against the whole world. Nobody believed in one God at that point. They all believed in idols. They all believed in idols. Why? Because it goes back to the Garden of Eden. What was the sales pitch that the snake used to get Eve to eat the fruit? What was it? What was the hook, as we say in business? What was it that closed the deal? The answer was, the snake said to her that if you eat this fruit, you will be like God. And that's what she wanted. She wanted to be like God. What does it mean to be like God? It means that I could become so smart, I don't need God. If I have technology and if I have power and money, I don't need God. I can figure it all out. I can make it all work by itself. And I could make a world where there's no room for God. Like we've said in the past, the word ego is edging God out. That I'm so filled with myself that there is no room for God. That's idolatry. That's what she saw. If I eat this fruit, I will be like God through my wisdom. You know, many people say, oh, look at the Jewish people. They're so small in their numbers, but they have so many Nobel Prizes and so many thises and so many that's and da-da-da, and they must be really, really smart. Matter of fact, I remember I was at the Northern Palace in China, and we were there, and some people were extremely friendly everywhere we went. And these people were really nice, and I don't know how, but somehow or another, they saw that we weren't Chinese. I don't know, but they figured that out. And so they said to us, where are you from? And I said, well, we're from Israel. We're from Jerusalem. And the first thing she said, wow, you must be really smart. So I said back to her in a nice way, trying to control not being too much of a former New Yorker. I said to her, well, it only is important that you think that I'm smart. Doesn't really matter if I'm smart, but as long as you think I am smart, that's okay. But why would she assume that I'm smart? Were there no idiot Jews? There are plenty of us. Don't worry. There's plenty of idiots who are Jews. It's not about being smart and therefore like you can come over and put like a little faucet and take out the smart and learn how you can be smart. That's not what it is. It's God. It's God. It's God's interaction with the Jewish nation that is smart. And God used the Jewish nation to show the whole world, not that the Jews are great, just the opposite, that the Jews are like every other human being on the planet. But God chose the Jews to show the entire world how great you can be. It's not, God's not unique to the Jews. God is for everybody. And therefore God shows, look what I can do for one nation. I could take them out of Egypt. I could rip apart an ocean and move them across. I can build temples. I can give you people like King David and King Solomon. I can give you all of that. Look, I did it for them. Why wouldn't I do it for you? Why wouldn't I do it for you? Because you're Chinese? Because you're Nigerian? Are you crazy? Who made you? God. Why wouldn't God? You wouldn't do it for your child? You wouldn't do everything for your child? Of course you would. Aren't we God's children? So therefore, the whole idea is not that Jews are smart. Jews are just people. But we show the world what you could have for yourself, just to open up that door to your Father, to your Creator. To be able to do that requires a personality that loves truth and a personality that loves to be humble. That's why if you look at all the biblical characters, they were humble. In fact, probably one of the greatest humble characters in the Bible wasn't even Jewish. He was Eliezer, Abraham's servant. He was a Canaanite. There was nobody as humble as he was, because humble means that you realize that you're just a conduit for allowing godly light and power and life to come through. To mistake your power as your power, that's idolatry. That's very dangerous. Think about this. In the 10 Commandments, not to kill somebody is number 6, but not to worship idols is number 2. Why? Because if you kill somebody, God forbid, all you've done is stop the body from working, but the person's soul continues to live. But if you create an idol, you kill the soul. You kill the person to be able to live beyond this world, or even to be able to really live in this world. And this is why, on one hand, atheists are something to really appreciate, because many atheists, when they say they do not believe in God, they are right, because the definition of God that they were taught is false. These are false gods. So these people who are very honest said, I can't believe that's really what God is all about. Really? That's what God's all about? I don't want any part of that. And they're right. They're really right. And that's why idolatry is so horrible, because idolatry puts an ice over the head of otherwise very intelligent, feeling good people who reject God when they don't really realize that what they rejected was not God. What they rejected were idols. But nobody ever came along and gave them the opportunity to have the education to be able to understand what it would really mean to be able to appreciate God. So I'm going to take it to the next level now. I'm going to show you, or share with you, if I may. This is a little TV book that I know a lot of you are already familiar with. It's called the Talmud. This is before there were gymnasiums. This is how Jews used to be able to exercise, would be able to lift all these heavy books. Today, you know, the only part of your body that's in shape is your thumbs, because that's the only part that you're exercising. But anyhow, I would actually like to read with you a section in the Talmud. Here, just for the heck of it. We've never actually seen the Talmud. So in the Talmud here, actually, you can see my little footnotes at the bottom, which were the beginning of the creation of the people's Talmud. That's where it all began. So you have the inner text is the Talmud itself, and the outside text over here and on the other side there are commentators. The most famous one, which is always on the inside track, was a commentator from the 10th hundreds known as Rashi. And on the outside track were, in part, his grandchildren, known as the Bali Tosafot, that lived a few hundred years later in the city of Worms. And Rashi was from the French city of Lyon. And these are, but I mean, commentary on the Talmud goes on forever and ever and ever. However, in this particular piece of Gemara, this is an analysis of the Gemara that deals with the concept of higher fear, let's call it. But it's a really bizarre piece of Talmud, so bear with me. What it's going to do here is begin with an analysis of a verse from the book of Daniel. Now, I don't want to go into this because I know that everybody's into this and I'm not into it. I mean, I am into it, but I'm not into talking about it. And that is everybody's trying to figure out when the Messiah is going to come, when the Mashiach will be here. Not my thing. When he comes, I'll let you know. But in the meantime, until it's known, you know, I got my thing to do, you got your thing to do, and we should stay focused on why we're here doing what we're doing. However, on this particular page in the Talmud, earlier than where we're going to start, is also analyzing verses from Daniel, which Rashi points out is the secret to when the Mashiach will come. But I'm not going to touch on that now. But this is what this particular page in the Talmud has been going through, is these cryptic sentences from the book of Daniel, and then trying to understand them. So now, this is the one we're going to look at. In the book of Daniel, it's written, Re'isi ani Daniel. My Hebrew, if you haven't figured out, is very Ashkenazi, so you'll have to forgive that. Re'isi ani Daniel. I, Daniel, had a vision. Levadi, I alone had this vision. Et hamora, I had this, I saw something. Va'anashim asher hayu imi, and the men who were with me, lo ru'u es hamora. They did not see this vision. Aval, but charda gadola nafla alehem vayverchu beharva. The people I was with did not see the vision that I saw, yet a horrible fear fell on them, and they, if we could put it in modern terms, freaked out and boom, ran away. So the first thing the Talmud wants to know is, who were these men? Ma ninhu anashi, who were these men? Over Rabbi Yirmiyah ve'esmei Rabbi Chia bar Abba, these rabbis will tell us who these men were. Zeh, these men were Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi. These three men were prophets, and if you look in the book of prophets, you will see they were the last of the prophets. Matter of fact, the very last of all the prophets is Malachi. So these three gentlemen all lived in the same time as Daniel, and they were the last three of the prophets in the book of prophets in the Bible: Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Inhu adifimine v'ihi adifiminaihu. Talmud says that they were greater than him, and he was greater than them. Inhu adifimine de inhu nivi'i v'ihi ulav navi. They were greater than Daniel because they were prophets, and Daniel was not a prophet. That's why the book of Daniel is not in the book of prophets. It's in the third section, the book of writings, because he was not a prophet. They were prophets, he was not. Ihu adif minaihu, de ihu chaza v'ihu lo chazu. However, he was greater than them, that even though he was not a prophet and they were prophets, he saw this vision and they didn't. So the Gemara asked the obvious question, right? Remember, questions. It's all about questions. Questions are holy. And the Gemara says, if they didn't see the vision, why did they become afraid? It says that he saw the vision, they didn't see the vision, but they got freaked out and they ran away. So the Gemara asks the obvious question. If they didn't see the vision, why are they running away? So the Gemara answers, Afal Gaf, even though the Inhu Lo Chazi, even though they did not see, Mazlaihu Chazu, the angelic energy of their soul that sits above a person, it saw. Let's just take a second here to see how Rashi explains what does that mean. Rashi says here, sorry. No, sorry. All right, I can't find the Rashi now. I don't want to waste our time, but that's what the Gemara says. Now, this is only starting, so don't lose your seat, okay? So we got three prophets. You know what it's like to be a prophet and be written in the Bible? I mean, you can't even do that today, even with $1 trillion. Nothing's going to get you in there. So to be a prophet in the Bible, handful of people out of the 700 gazillion people that ever lived on our planet made it into that book. And yet this guy, Daniel, who didn't quite get in there, but he got into the next book after that, he has a vision that they don't have, but yet something mystical above them saw this and freaked them out and they ran away, even though they didn't see it themselves. Amar Ravina, the Rabbi Ravina says, Shema Mina, we learn from this passage, Hai man demibais, a person who feels a fear overcoming them. Afal gafti ihu lo chaze, mazliu chaze. Even though he doesn't see what it is he's afraid of, there's something higher in his soul warning him that there's something bad happening around him. So the Gemara asks again the obvious question. Tikante, what should he do? Right? What do you do? Right? If you're in the train and something's going wrong with the train, you break that glass, you pull the little red lever. What do you do now? So Likre Kriya Shema, the first thing he should do is reconnect himself to God. That's what it means by saying the Shema Yisrael, which thanks to Dot, I have a copy of in Chinese. It means to connect to God, because if you connect to God, which is the highest power, and that's what you fear, then there's nothing else to fear. However, what if you're in a place, because you're not allowed to say the holy prayer of Shema everywhere. Jews are not allowed to speak of God or Torah in a bathroom, for example. It's not a correct place. So what if a person's in the middle of being in the bathroom and they get this horrible fear, and now they can't say Kriya Shema? What do? So the Gemara says, run away, just like those prophets did. Run away, get out of there if you can. Arbagamidi, run away a certain distance so that you're far enough from fear. But then the Gemara says, below, what if you can't run away? What if you're in the middle of using the bathroom? You just can't run away. What do? So then the Gemara says, you say the following expression, Lema. Hachi easy debate viche shmine minai. There is a goat in the slaughterhouse that is fatter than me. In other words, you say to this angel of destruction, look at me, I'm a skinny little chicken. There's no meat on my bones. But you're going to just eat bones? They're nice, big, fat hens out there. Go get one of them. You'll have a good meal. Don't waste your time with me. That's the Talmud. Talmud tells us an amazing story about the fact that the soul is able to see and to perceive things that we might not necessarily see with our own eyes. Now let's try to pull this all together. Eve wanted to be like God. She saw that the fruit was good. Go back and look at the language in the Bible. She saw that the fruit was good. And she was told by the snake that it would make her like God because she would have so much wisdom, she wouldn't need to pray for God. She's got it all covered. Technology's got it all worked out. No glitches here. So why the language saw? To see. We have in the holy prayer of the Shema Yisrael, God cautions us not to go after our hearts and our eyes because they will mislead us. Instead, go after our wisdom. So the question is, it seems to be out of order. It should say, don't go after your eyes and then your heart. Your eyes see something and then it desires it in the heart. Why does the Torah reverse and say first the heart and then the eyes? It's telling us something very powerful. It's telling us that our eyes only see what we educated our heart to want. Fashion is not something that you automatically want. It's what you are trained by the trillion-dollar advertising agencies to want. So once it's on your heart, your eyes begin to look for it. That's a huge gift because it means you can go back into your heart and reset the program. You're not a prisoner. You can free yourself from these stereotypes, from these conclusions, from false gods. And you can then put in your heart something real. So now your eyes will be looking to see what is really out there in this world. That creates freedom, because then ultimately it brings you to an awareness of God in the world, just like Abraham came to an awareness of God in the world. That awareness is something that no matter how much of an atheist we may think we are, at the end of the day, we are all human beings and we are connected to God. No matter how much cholesterol is blocking that flow from coming into us, we can remove it. We can free ourselves. We can claim our future and live forever. This is only a car that drives you from one station to the next. It's not who you are, but who you are will depend on what you do while you are here on this planet. That's the freedom. And so therefore, no matter what a person thinks and knows, we can always every day grow and become greater and greater. And through those energies above us that can sense and see, we can come in touch with those things and take them from here and move them into here, which means that even higher levels will now come down, because what was there before is now here, then what was here before is now here. And that's how you grow. It becomes a ladder that brings your soul higher and higher, and also at the same time, bringing the world to a greater place. That's what we're created for. And so that's the answer to the question, why are atheists afraid of God? Because on a superficial level, it's a funny question. They don't even believe in God. But we're not dealing with belief. We're dealing with knowledge. And so therefore, the more that every human being, even the atheist, who maybe for very good reasons doesn't believe in God, because they were false gods that he or she rejected, will ultimately can come to really see what's in front of them in the reality of creation. So that's something which is a blessing to all human beings that are alive. And if we're alive, it means because God believes in us. You know, as a Jew, when we wake up in the morning, before we talk, we say a sentence, which is Moda ani lefanecha melechai v'kayam shechazati binishvasi v'chemla rabbe emuna secha. Moda ani lefanecha, I am moda to you, an extreme form of thanks. I am thankful to you. Moda ani, I am moda ani lefanecha, before you, melechai v'kayam, the living king of all the world. Moda ani lefanecha melechai v'kayam shechazarti binishvasi, that has returned my soul to my body. Sleep is like death. Waking up is like the resurrection of the dead. Shechazati binishmasi, that has returned my soul to me. Bechemla rabe emunasecha, and with great faith. But what is the great faith? Not my faith in God. Bechemla rabe emunasecha is God's faith in me. People ask the question, do you believe in God? You know what? Who cares? I mean, with all due respect, who cares? What do I care if you believe in God? What do you care if that other person believes in God? It's a ridiculous, unimportant question. I'll tell you what the important question is. Does God believe in you? That's the question. Doesn't matter if you believe in God, big deal. Hey, I'm not sure I really believe in God. Big deal, right? But does God believe in you? Woo-hoo-hoo, right? That's really the question. That's the question. You know what? The answer is absolutely. How do you know? Because you're sitting there alive today. Because because you woke up in the morning, because God's belief in you, that you're going to go and take the day and become a better person and make a better world. So I bless you all, that that's what we do. That when you wake up tomorrow morning and you look in the mirror, you have no idea who that person is. You have no idea who that person is, because you're a whole new human being. You've just grown into a new person each day. What else is there to do? That's life, is to grow. Life is all about growing. So thank you very much. Shay Shay, Dalu, Toda Rabah.
Thank
you all very
you. Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Bye. Have a good day.
Dalu.
Bye.